The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Let's Go to Japan, our game of the week, interview designer Pat Mooney from Flagbearer Games in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high-five, well-designed game boards. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's going on, Doug? How are you?
I can't complain. I could, but nobody would listen.
Listen, we just might not care, Doug.
Yeah, it'd be a terrible
because
show.
This is a board game podcast. We're entertainment. We try to be slightly educational. Some would argue humorous by mistake. But
inadvertently.
Let's get after the podcast, huh?
All right. Well, we got some follow-up here. Just this week, we posted a cities review on YouTube. So that is a kind of a chunked out version of the podcast, a review section of our game of the week. And there's pictures and some overlays on there. So hopefully we'll try and get some more of those out. It's all of this other extra YouTube stuff is just when I have time.
Well, it's a labor of love, and thanks for doing it.
Trying to fit it in there. So check that out if you haven't seen it already. And hopefully that'll give us a little bit more visibility of being traditional reviewers. I'm using air quotes there. Another thing of note, Michael has been killing it on X lately. So if you're not following us there, you're missing out. A lot of great posts on things we've done in the past, things we're currently covering, and reposts and retweets of stuff that's going on in the industry. So good work there, Michael. And
oh, thanks. And thanks for all your help with the templates and everything. And I'm lurking on TikTok. We have I think one follower right now on Blue Sky. So as Doug mentioned, though, it's all about what are the channels and, how much capacity can two fellas in Wisconsin
with day jobs.
Yeah. The podcast is our primary, but we're just trying to reach more people, tell stories about games and skills that can happen from it, and carry out our mission of being a friendly place for new and experienced gamers. So
yeah, I've got some bad moments in game schooler marketing I wanted to talk about.
Okay, from us?
No, from me, particularly me. Last Friday, so the day that the episode, our episodes air, but last Friday, I had an event for my brother. My brother is a public speaker and an artist, and he had kind of a show. Long story short, I got home very late that night. I'm thinking in the 1 to 2 a.m. range. 2-hour drive there, 2-hour drive back. Why did I have to get home at 2 o'clock in the morning and not spend the night and get a hotel like a sane person? Because I had a flea market to go to the next day. A board game flea market. And not only did I get to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, but the carbon monoxide detector outside of my bedroom door decided 5:45 would be a great time to go off. So I got up quite early that morning and was in a fog like nobody's business. And I went to drive to the flea market, and Michael texted me, and he goes, "You should bring some business cards." And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a good idea. Halfway to the flea market, I realized not only do I not have business cards that I set aside, I also do not have the envelope of change and $5 bills that I needed for exchanging at the flea market when people are buying said games.
One part of that I believe, another part of that I don't believe. I believe that you forgot your business cards. I don't believe you accidentally forgot your change. Somehow you're a really good business person, Doug. So
that's how out of it I was. I got about halfway there. I had to call my daughter. I said, "Go into my desk drawer. There's this thing. I need you to get it. Hand it off to me in the driveway." Speed over to Sun Prairie. May have violated some moving laws. I'm not sure. But I got there like a minute after it opened. panicking, setting up my stuff at the table. Our buddy Dan didn't know that. He's like, I'm glad you made it. I didn't know if you were coming. So, of course, he took up our whole table. So we had to now scoot his stuff over to fit mine on there. Long story short, on top of that, apparently a member of the Discord went to this flea market, but didn't know it was me. He didn't know it was me because he doesn't watch the YouTube videos. So he doesn't know what we look like. Thank you for listening to the podcast and signing up for the Discord, but a missed opportunity there.
The librarian on her Discord?
No,
okay.
No. I believe it's he, but I could be wrong. And so
podcast.
Yes, friend of the podcast. And I saw his bundle of games that he posted a picture on in the Discord. I'm like, I think I saw all of those games. Like I saw somebody carrying those games around.
From the flea market you were at?
Yes.
I'm a little upset with you. Why didn't you pick up Bonsai for us, for the show?
You gave me one request and I found it and you scoffed at the price.
A Grail game. They had some gems in that stack of games, man. Bonsai is one I've been wanting to try for our show.
I came home with nothing. It was a good day for me on that front.
You're right. Marketing failure. I'll give you that.
So, small world and a comical experience and story there that I thought I would share.
Awesome.
Any follow-up from you, Michael?
Just wanted to mention one thing from our game of the week last week. I had fun playing the game, which was Hunters, and it's a Marvel game, and it got me thinking as I was walking my dog this afternoon on lunch. I think we've done 4 or 5 Marvel games, and we might need to do like a big old episode where we try to get, I don't know, folks from Roxley on or somebody to interview them in the School of Gaming and do a Marvel recap.
Say Robert Downey Jr.
Or Tom Vassell, whoever, some celebrities of the world. Well, for me, that is big. You know, Roxley, Gavin Brown, Manny Tremblay and crew, that's big.
Yeah.
But that's just the world that I live in. But I wanted to mention one thing from our game of the week last week, and that's a lot of fun playing the game solo. One aspect that I really enjoyed that I forgot to slip into the segment, and it was a game where playing defense was the best form of offense. And so it was fun to have that little puzzle in a game solo. Oftentimes, playing a game solo, you know, it's some sort of achievement or accomplishment or points. Solo opponent in that game is Jarvis, and he has the ability to score a ton of points. So I did enjoy that at 1. And I also mentioned, 2 and 3 and all those other things. But that was just one thing that I wanted to follow up on from our show last week.
Awesome. So move on to the spotlight for this week. Does that work for you? Or you guys?
I just want to touch real quickly on what's awesome with gaming here. The Game Schooler podcast Discord, Doug mentioned it, but talk about a great landing spot. And there was so much positive feedback from our interview that we had with Danielle Reynolds last week. People who were saying, look, I felt comfortable to go to a convention for the first time. Really, and just it's a wonderful landing spot. And it's a great place if you just want to see kindness in the hobby. That this hobby is better, kinder. And not a ton of gaming lately for me. There have been other life events, but one thing that has, with some of those life events and just people, how you hear voices from people who are in your life, right? Like parents, grandparents, right? And one thing that my dad would always say is, folks, at one point in time, I was flying through college trying to get my education. Like I was loading up on credits. I knew what I wanted out of life, and I was racing. And my dad would say, "It's not a race, Michael." And I've been in the home office here, and I see all these games, and we're getting some review copies in, and I feel pressure because I told this publisher 6 to 8 weeks I'm gonna get it out there, and I can hear my dad's voice. It's not a race, Michael. And today would be his birthday. You know what I mean? So it was just kind of one of those cool moments. About the journey-based hobby, hype, call to the new, and FOMO can really create almost like this sense of race environment for, I think, a lot of people, right? Yeah. People who review games, people who play games, people who have a weekly game group or play with their spouses and partners. It was just kind of my call to the hobby, man. Enjoy playing the games. And that takes me into my third part, and then I'll be done, I promise. But this part, you might want to bookmark where we're at because you could probably turn this into some YouTube gold with your skills. But oh my goodness, thank you, Luke Laurie, Maximus Laurie, and Peter Vaughn, and the team at Cardboard Alchemy for Andromeda's Edge. Then just punching this out and putting it together, putzing like 20 to 30 minutes at a time. There's a whole fan group out on Facebook. I haven't even gotten a first game in yet against Unity, but it's got these little standees and some ships. Thing looks beautiful and amazing. So really just been trying to slow down and enjoy the hobby over the last couple weeks, and it's been just a wonderful outlet.
Yeah. It's amazing how much the churn applies to the common gamer just as much as it does to reviewers, and that's kind of alarming, right? It's like you kind of expect the churn from people that are reviewing games, like, yep, we got to cover the next one, don't get time to go back and enjoy. But the fact that filters all the way down to just hobby gamers and regular folks that are just trying to play games, I think it's a great idea there, that it's not a race, and you get to things when you get to things. So great thing there. As far as what's awesome in gaming for me, although we haven't done it yet, I am really excited for our interview in this episode. I'm a big history buff, and so I'm really curious to see what they've got going over there at Flagbearer Games. So the spotlight this week is a game called Flip 7 from the Op. It was published in 2024. The designer is Eric Olson. It's for 2 to 7 players, about 20 minutes, and it is a party/family game. Very simple game. You're going to flip over cards one by one without flipping the same number twice. Although this isn't just any deck of cards, in Flip 7 there is only one card, two cards, three cards, etc., all the way up to 12? Is 12 the high there? And there are also a bunch of special cards that can score you extra points, give you a second chance, or freeze your opponents in their tracks to prevent them from scoring more. Are you the type of player that wants to play it safe and bag points before you bust, or are you going to risk it all and go for the bonus points by flipping over 7 in a row? On your turn, very simple. I am going to hit or stay, and if I hit and I get a duplicate number, I bust. If not, I am going to either stop and bank them, and I'm going to get the face value of all the cards in front of me to accumulate. The goal is to be the first one to reach 200 points, and there are some other special cards where you can force an opponent to draw 3 cards in a row, or freeze them as they're ramping up, or a second chance. If you bust, you can discard a second chance card and draw another one. Michael, with these great visuals here. So those, and then there's some score modifiers where you can double your points or add +2 in that case. And if you happen to get 7 cards without matching, you get a bonus 15 points. That's it. Simple game. And it's a great...
Ends the round. So if
the
when
round
everybody
ends,
busts, if one person gets
banks.
7, or if everyone busts or banks.
Yep. So it's a great filler game for those that like a 15 to 20 minute game with a simple push your luck decision. My main thought on this is it is what it is, right? If you're going into this expecting anything more, it is a fun, fast, party-style game. And you may already have a game like this in your collection. I think everybody seems to have kind of one push your luck style, kind of a raucous type game. But if you don't, this is a solid choice. So if you don't have a game like that, or you're looking for one like that, this is a good one to pick up.
I think it's very similar to a game that we reviewed recently, Kabanga from Amigo. Just that it's going to move fast. There's going to be a little bit of tension at the table. You're not actually throwing cards at people and screaming at them, but you're letting people know when they made a mistake. Like, yeah, you shouldn't have taken another card. You had a 12, 11, and 10. The odds were you were going to get another 12, 11, or 10. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a simple choice, right? There's very little strategy outside of the idea of hit me or stop.
No fun. Sorry. Go ahead, Doug.
Well, and it travels well. There's 2 versions. I don't know if that's
Promotional version.
a promotional one. The main one comes in a slightly bigger box, if you can see it behind my shoulder. But if you remove it from the box, it's a great game for a quiver or to put in a deck box and just carry around. That would travel well, and I think would do well. I know we have a lot of folks in the Discord that like to play outside, travel, play it while they're waiting at restaurants and while they're on vacation, stuff like that. So that would be a good one that fits in with that as well.
Spotlight game, it's one that you can teach while playing that very first time. People who listen know that the way that I teach a game or learn a game is very different than my wife. My wife wants to know every single rule and have everything from start to finish. I said, no, we're just going to play this. Just go along with it here. And, did that with my 9-year-old after a car trip this weekend. And boy, did they enjoy it, and even right before the podcast, I just asked my 9-year-old, what'd you think of that one, Liza? It.
Yeah.
It's a keeper for us in our house. It's one that I want to get to the table at the after school board game club. I think it will work great there. I don't know how many actual skills are in it, but if you're looking for just a fun game that's fast, a little change-up game. The other thing where I think it fits in well, with the ops, other party, they call them game night classics, but like Tapple, Hughes and Q's, Blank Slate, Telestrations. If you're playing What the Cup, yeah. If you're playing multiple games, this one fits right in there. So I'll just say, like, this is a review copy, so the little promotional edition. I doubt that that's what's available out there in the store. I think you'll see the one that Doug has behind his shoulder.
Well, and a cool game too that once your kids know, I can see them teaching it to other kids. Or if grandparents are coming over to babysit for a night, this is one that kids will be able to pick out and say, hey, Grandma, let's play this one. And I can see a lot of memories and things happening in that circumstance as well.
The one other thing, I know it's a spotlight, but I just want to mention here that I think is really cool is the end game. There's a condition. It's a race to 200. But even in a game that I played with Doug and one of his kids, I was the first one to 200. And so she needed to make sure that she had more than, what do you have, Michael? 203, 208. And so she took an extra card to try to get the win, right? Because we were both hitting 200 in the same round. So that was a cool little moment in gaming.
Yeah, so a cool game to check out or certainly try if you get the chance. Spotlight, Flip 7 from the Op. And before we move on, just a reminder, Michael and I both talked about our Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Is a great community. Check that out. Spread the word about the podcast and interact with us on all of our various platforms, whether that's YouTube or X, things like that. Reach out. Learn our ugly faces. So if you see us at a flea market, you recognize us. And
you should learn everybody's beautiful face. Maybe you should. Pressure's on us to know all of our...
Yeah, the Discord's now going to have a thing where everybody posts their face and a brief biography of themselves.
Boutique podcast, after all.
Yeah. And any contact us with any questions or comments, email at gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. We've got a good one for you, folks. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Let's Go to Japan, designed by Josh Wood and published by Alderock Entertainment Group, AEG. Doug, give us the stats.
All right, published in 2024. Plays 1 to 4 players, 45 to 60 minutes. Had to laugh here. The box says 10 plus. Board Game Geek is saying 8-year-olds getting in on the action. I'm going to disagree with that. I don't think I get any pushback from you on that, right, Michael?
10 plus.
10
plus. Easy
is,
10 plus. I'd say 12 plus, but 10 plus.
Yeah, certainly the starting point that we would recommend. And I'm going to go out on another limb here, and I think I'm going to jump ahead. I have a things to be aware of a section, and the Board Game Geek weight score to me is a little bit misleading. So
let's get where do you go?
And my point to that is I think this is a light hobby game.
I do too.
with could be family game, but I'm going to put it in the light hobby game. But if you go on Board Game Geek, it's going to say it's a 2.12 rating, which would normally be in the range that we would call a family game.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be there's a lot of information and a lot of iconography on each card that you kind of need to sort out. So I think that's why, for me, it fits in the light hobby.
And I have it in the light hobby for those reasons and the round structure. Every single round plays slightly differently, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So let's just get into it, Doug. I'll send it over to you to do the description.
So in Let's Go to Japan, you are a traveler planning and then experiencing your own dream vacation to Japan. The game consists of 13 rounds in which players draw activity cards illustrated by Japan-based artists and strategically place them in different days in their week-long itinerary. These can't-miss tourist attractions will have you bouncing between Tokyo and Kyoto as you try to puzzle out the optimal activities to maximize your experience while balancing your resources. The game ends with a final round in which you ultimately go on your planned trip, activating each of your cards in order along the way. And the player who collects the most points by the end of the trip wins. As you set up the game, you are going to be, you have a personal player board that's divided into 6 days, Monday through Saturday. And you are going to, everybody's going to have the same setup, but you're going to distribute 6 experience icons across those 6 days. Then you are going to take turns drafting cards. Usually it's going to be 1 or 2 cards at a time and then playing one. And you'll, for example, in the first round, you're going to pick up a card from the Tokyo stack and the Kyoto stack, pick one of those and play it to any one of your days out in front of you. Those cards are going to have icons that match the experience tokens in the game. If you manage to place 1 or 1 to 3 experience tokens on a card into a day that matches that experience, you're going to get a bonus. That may be a wild experience. It might be some additional walks you can go on, additional travel tokens, because every day or every time that you need to switch from Tokyo to Kyoto or back and forth, you need a train token to go in between those two. And if you don't, you're going to lose minus 2 points at the end of the game. Each day is going to have 3 cards underneath it, and whichever one you place on top, it's not like one of those games like Ohanami where you can only go up or down. Basically, once you put a card down, the next card, you can put it above
you can
or
layer
below
it in between
the card, and the same goes for the third one. Essentially, whichever one you have on top is going to have kind of a day highlight bonus at the bottom that's going to be triggered based on the experiences that you've previously had on your vacation. So that's just kind of a general overview about how you're playing. There's also stress and happiness that you're kind of juggling throughout the game. So as you spend more money, things are expensive, it might cause you more stress. If you're doing free activities, it's going to give you more happiness and experiencing more of the city and stuff like that. That's the general idea of the game. Let's talk about some things that we like. For me, one of the things, and I know this is, I realized while I was making notes for this episode that this comes across as kind of a broken record for me, but it's very important to me why it's usually the first thing I always think of, which is the artwork and theme integration. We usually talk about how
it's a 10 in this game.
I always talk about, I like the artwork, I like it. Well, I bring it up because it's important to me in general. Those are things that attract me to a game. I like a good theme. I like vibrant artwork. However, I think a game that stands out on the table and a theme that works, that makes it easier to explain, gets the game to the table more frequently. From a teaching aspect, it's easier for me to teach people to pick up when the theme is really good, and when the art is really good, people are excited to see it when it's set up. When they sit down at the table and I say, hey, I got a new game I want to show you, the artwork and the presentation of this game makes people say, this looks interesting, and I'm curious to know more, which is why I always bring it up, because I think it is so important to the hobby.
Yeah, and it leads into that initial play experience. If the artwork, the theme, the graphic design they all meld well together. For me, I can learn the game halfway through that first play. And it's like, oh, now I know how things are going to fit together. Couple things. The designer, Josh Wood, is a developer at AEG. I believe that's his full-time job. Josh, you can go ahead and listen to this and correct me if I'm wrong. So he's been a part of a lot of different games that we have played, reviewed, been a game of the week. He's also the designer of a game called Cat Lady, which is a fantastic little game that you and I both really like. And Santa Monica, which is a game that I know a lot of people like. There's a graphic designer on this project, though, too, that I just want to highlight as well, because I think that will lead into what you're talking about. And that is Bridget Indelicato. And Bridget has done graphic design work for War Chest, Penny Black, Dice Miner, Zuvadis by the good Dr. Rainer Knizia. And I just think when you bring in a high-performing graphic designer to your team, it does make a difference in a hobby that has 3,500 different games that are being published. So fantastically designed game. I'm not trying to take anything away from the designer. I'm just trying to add into what you're saying about a reason. Folks, we played this game and got done with it. We ran it back and played it a second time and looked at each other. Was that back in July, right when you got it from Kickstarter, and said, this is game of the week? Right? Like we knew right away. And so there's just so many things happening in the game that lead to that we want to talk to you about.
Yeah. For me, I think it's got the perfect amount of puzzle, right? While you're playing this game, it works so well because you're looking at, is this card good for this day? Is it right? Is it the right city? Is it going to work? What's the bonus on the card? So it has this cool puzzle while you're working on it. However, it works well because the drafting is limited. You're never drafting from more than 4 cards. That's the most. And most of the time, you're only picking up 2 cards and playing 1. So that easy choice, the difference between that and I can work on my own little thing and I'm invested in that compared to, okay, everybody draw a hand of 8 cards and you're going to keep 4 of them. Well, then I'm spending a whole bunch of time looking, okay, how does this one fit? How does this one fit? How does that one fit? But because it's so limited, it keeps the game moving. Yeah. And I can run it through my little matrix of, does it work in this city? Ooh, this matches this symbol. I might want to put it on Monday. And then, ooh, but that bonus is not going to work. Or whatever it may be. That puzzle works with the speed of play. And although there's limited player interaction, and usually when you're drafting, essentially the only thing I'm kind of paying attention to while I'm drafting in this game is not necessarily taking something away from an opponent, but being kind of cognizant of like, I have a whole bunch of Kyoto cards waiting for me to pick up in the next round. So maybe I should take a Tokyo one here. So I'm not kind of pigeonholed into one thing. And you're not racing at anything. And so even though the interaction is limited, the engagement is so strong that I feel like, and it moves so quickly that it works.
Those are really good points. And Doug, I'm about to throw a ton of gamer and educator vernacular and jargon.
Jargon?
Yeah.
Give me the jargon.
I will. What I love about this game is there's forward planning with backwards design. You can begin with the end in mind, and there's variable setup. So let me just explain all those pieces right there so I don't sound like a marketer for this game that both of us have bought, by the way. That's how much we really enjoy it. When you set up the game, you flip out these little tokens at random, and that tells you where those bonuses are going to be on each day, right? So now, starting with the second time that I'm playing this game, I can look at the end of the week at that Friday, Saturday, and see where those bonuses are going to be. And I'm like, okay, I need to be able to maximize these types of experiences on those days. And then in that initial play, if you plan so poorly that you start out in Kyoto on Monday, go to Tokyo on Tuesday, you're back in Kyoto on Tuesday, back in Tokyo on Wednesday to Kyoto. Like that initial play could be so bad or so good that you just kind of figure out that trip taking experience and how those train tokens work with those other bonuses. And we didn't even mention taking a walk, WALK, and all the different cool things that can happen. But I do like that there are very few games that I play where that teacher part of my brain, like how to actually organize the week, is activated. And Let's Go to Japan does that in such an abundance that I actually feel like I'm back in the classroom, planning a unit and looking how the mini lessons are going to fit so that the kids aren't just watching a video on Friday because I'm a high performing teacher. We're going to do something awesome on Friday, right? Shout out to all the teachers teaching on a Friday. So there's a lot there. It might not have made sense to anybody else. Might not have made sense to you. But man, I really do enjoy how the game takes a trip, breaks it down into a week, has some variable setup components in there. Shout out to replayability. Yeah.
I mean, I think the game is such a fun concept. I think immediately after playing it, I said, I want other versions of this game.
Yeah, you did.
It's like, I want the vacation version in, New York or something, or the USA. But it's interesting to me because I feel like this game,
Let's go to Wisconsin. Let's make a plug for it.
3 cards. It's a 3-card game. If 10 Days in the USA is the macro version of a travel game, this is the micro version of a travel game. And you are really getting into the details. And it's one of those. So if they ever do a second Kickstarter, that'll be my quote on there.
There you go.
But
always working.
This is one of the games, and I can't say this a lot. In the description, they call it a round, but I don't really think of it as a round. But this game has the most enjoyable scoring round at the end of the game when you actually take your trip. And the way that you're accumulating those experiences, they have...
Because your bonuses kick in.
Yeah,
you're getting little dopamine hits all along the way. I'm happy for Doug scoring, and I might be losing by 35, but look at all the bonus he's getting.
So you got temples and shrines, foods and drinks, nature's gardens, shopping goods, unique experiences that you're doing throughout the trip. And it's interesting because you get to the end of the game, and those bonuses, those day highlights, they are cumulative. So if I have a bonus or a day highlight on Friday, it's taking account all of the other things I've done on that trip. And so that planning throughout your journey of like, oh, well, by that time, maybe I will have enough food, drink experiences to really make this one score a ton of points. And it's almost like playing a second mini game as you watch. It's like putting on the performance at the end of rehearsal. You spent the whole game building up to this point, and then you get to go on your journey, and it's fun. It's like, okay, here's what I'm doing on Monday. I did this, this, and this, and I'm getting these points and scoring it out. And it really works in a way that in this game particularly, a lot of times you get to the end of the game and you say, hey, what did everybody do on blues? And everybody says 14, 12, 31. Okay, what everybody do on yellows? This game is set up in a way that you have to almost attack it like a trip and go day by day and say, what'd you do on Monday, Michael? How'd your Monday work out? And you get the score from that. And there's bonuses, and, additional scoring, which...
I'm so glad you brought that up, Doug. I got outworked, folks. I tried to do research. I was really excited to talk about this one. This is a great game. I've been wanting to talk about it for the game of the week, and I didn't even have endgame scoring anywhere in my notes. And you're right. Whether you're playing it at 2 players or 3 players, it's not so much. And folks who've listened to more than one episode know that I'm hyper competitive. And this is one of those games that I'm still excited to see how well they did on their trip. Because I think intensity isn't the right word, but there's a level of...
It's engagement.
It is engagement, and it only happens at the board game table. This doesn't happen in video games. And this is kind of a culmination of somebody who's played a lot of games and has designed other games and knows what they want in that end game phase and really put it together.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, look, you got that sushi combo on Tuesday. How did you get that to work like that? So that led to something, a 18-point day on Wednesday, and you see how those pieces cascade.
Well, and it doesn't matter, you talked about the competitive part. It doesn't matter until the end of the game whether you won or lost, because you can't keep track of what somebody else is doing throughout the game. You have no idea. It's like, I can be aware of bonuses to people, but I have no idea whether that's going to translate to any points for them. And so you play the whole game, you run your system, and then somebody reads off the scores at the end after everybody travels, and you're like, yeah, I don't care. I lost because I had a great time building my trip and then going on it. I think in the 4 times that you and I have played this together, I think we have swapped scores evenly. Yes. I think you won the first game, I won the second game, you won the third game, I won the fourth game. It went back and forth just like that. And it was a thing where it's like, when we got done with the end of the game, I didn't say, oh, we need to play this again because I need to try and win. I want to play this again because that was awesome.
Yeah,
and I literally didn't care about the score because, you talk about the dopamine hits during a game. This game was full of them that by the end, the score was so inconsequential to the experience I've had with this game that just made me want to play it again. Let's do that again. It was such a fun, interesting puzzle that you can't say that about a lot of games. And I loved not knowing what the score is. Yeah,
that's a great point. I'm sorry to jump in on it there, but I really can't tell you how long the game takes. Usually I will time games, especially if we're getting to, if it feels like this is a game of the week, I need to know, is it 45 or 60? Because there's a cutoff point. Yeah. If a game is more than 30 minutes, it's likely not going to fit in a school setting when you have setup and takedown, right? So I don't know, because I've been so engaged when I'm playing it. I don't know how long this game takes. I'm sorry, people. I didn't time myself on my watch like I strive to. And that is the only caveat that I'll have. And this could very much just be me. So take that for what it's worth. But I didn't have one teaching and learning game. I actually had 2. Because we played this game about 90 days apart or 60 days apart. And I almost had to relearn it again.
Yeah.
But that could very well just be on me and the fact that, I might have played 60 or 70 games in between.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever get rid of this. And that's a pretty bold statement to say. I churn through games, but I do want to make one other note, because I know we can get people excited about games, and we see that in our Discord where people will run out. And right after I played Doug's copy, I was like, oh, I need to get the Kickstarter all in.
Michael
because
was that guy.
That Matt Suri edition has all the expansions, and it comes with wooden bits, and it comes with ceramic bowls, and it comes with play mats. And folks, like, if I could go back in time and hop in the DeLorean, I would say base game's plenty.
Yeah, I just have the generic
it's not a game
version.
I'm going to play solo. I want to play this game with other people. I have other games that I want to play solo. I'm not sure I'll ever actually play this game solo. This is one that I want to get out and I want to teach to other people, and I want to have that experience of passing cards across the table. And so I just wanted to put that little disclaimer out there. Learn from me. I don't think you have to run out and give Alderock $146 or whatever it is of your money, even if you're comboing together coupons and deals and you can get it down to under 100, whatever you do. There's plenty in the base game is what I'm trying to say to our dear listeners. I think, but that's just me.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I hope this game does well for them, because I could imagine it becoming very much like a Ticket to Ride series where they just keep coming out with new editions with different tweaks in different cities and stuff, and something I'd love to see. As far as skills in this game, there's some interesting ones in here. Certainly there's tactical thinking, there's changing information, and you kind of have to adapt on the fly, especially when you're getting 2 cards around and you got to play one. And sometimes things aren't the best. You have to make the best decision. So
that's a very polite way of saying it. Sometimes you just ruin the trip, Doug. You just put so much stress on that you lost You
So
lost.
there's certainly decision making, but we talked about this a little bit last week. But the goals, a game in which players have clearly defined victory conditions that they must work towards. This game is really unique in the way that it builds upon itself as you're kind of building your engine for the end game scoring and keeping in mind, okay, will I have enough to meet this bonus by the time it gets activated, that end of day bonus, and piecing those together. It is the entire focus of the game is keeping track of what that end game situation is. And I think the way that you get there is through the logistics, right? A game that allows players to manage production flow between the point of origin and consumption. And that kind of laid out on a conveyor belt calendar of, okay, I'm starting out my trip here and I need to accumulate some food experiences, temple experiences, so that they pay off later in the trip and I can have a well-rounded trip, and all of those things working together. I think there are a lot of really neat skills that this game does well. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I have those same skills. And, I also have information processing and comprehension, and we've defined those over and over. I do think that the skills are going to be based on the age of the player. And that's something that maybe we talk about too much, maybe we haven't talked about enough recently. But I think if you are a, 14, early to mid teenager, you can really develop a lot of those skills that Doug is talking about. But if you're a 10-year-old, you're just going to be trying to float to play the game and really all the pieces that are going on. Now, maybe the board game geek age means that 8+ an 8-year-old can play alongside an adult. We talk about that often and could develop some of those skills. I think you summarized it perfectly and succinctly, especially at that 12+, 13+, 14+. The engagement's through the roof. My concern is that the text on the cards is what can interfere with some of the skill development. And that's where, I don't want to put a limitation or
not necessarily the text, but the iconography.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Because the text on the cards is there is text, and it actually is quite informative. So the same type of thing that we talk about in her story, where you can read the back of a card, it'll tell you a little bit about the neighborhood or the restaurant or the type of food.
But even that comprehension and information processing with the iconography, all the beautiful things that I've done. I mean, I've been throwing praise at it, but just from if you look at it as an educator lens of, it could be challenging of how to get everything to fit together that could lead to frustration. I think all those skills that you mentioned, they're there. They're absolutely there in repeated plays, probably even in just 1 or 2 plays of this game. But I haven't played it with enough kids to really know where that entry point is for this game. I hope to continue to come back and get this one to the table repeatedly and report back to folks on it.
Yeah, and I think I think we talked about it at the top of the segment, where it's like that 10+ for me is bare minimum, and 12 points or 12-year-old is where you're going to start. And I think some of the skills, which are kind of unique in this game, in that the idea is they're inherent to doing well in the game. You have to be good and improve on logistics in order to do well at the game. They're part of the game. So it's not necessarily like, oh, they'll pick this up after repeated play. It's like, part of me feels like you're going to learn logistics and how to get from point A to point B just by playing the game.
Yeah.
And
that's a good point.
In a way that is negative and positive. In what I mean by that is, you can do very poorly and learn, okay, that did not work out how I had planned. And so your kiddos can learn from the not working out just as well as they can from it working out flawlessly.
Yeah.
Saying like, ooh, I should have maybe, you can see that right at the end of the game. It's like, I misplayed that. And so that's a skill that they're learning on the spot.
Well, and I have some baggage, Doug. So as somebody who does travel occasionally for work, one of my greatest fears is going to a city unplanned. I don't want to get stuck in Charlotte. I don't want to go to Atlanta. No. So when I'm playing this game, I'm very rigid in where I'm traveling. And I'm not going to. No, I might be able to get back and forth. I see I have the trains, but I'm not going to do it. So you're probably right.
Yeah, this fits into my my Disney planning fast pass domination brain. And then we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we think that the A plus is kind of ridiculous on Board Game Geek, and certainly that the flow of the game is going to put this into a light hobby game. If you are familiar with gaming, it's not going to be an issue for you. But if you think that grandma and grandpa are going to pull this off the shelf and start playing, it's not going to be the case. There's got to be, we define that light hobby as there needs to be at least one gamer in the group that can kind of spearhead and run the game for you. And I think that's where this one comfortably sits.
Agreed. And I think the best fit is at a game night.
Yep.
Game night, playing a game on the weekend.
Or, family game night if you're...
Yep. I think this is the main event of a game night.
Yep. So that is our game of the week. Let's go to Japan. Give it a try if you get the chance.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we interview founder of Flagbearer Games and lead designer of Nations and Cannons, Pat Mooney. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Howdy, guys. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I'm excited to talk to you about this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the hobby, and what is the origin story of Flagbearer Games?
Sure. So yeah, I've been into TTRPGs probably since college. I've been one of those perennially wanted to play, but can never quite get a group together until that point. Been in and around, bouncing through various different types of editions of D&D, and through all the different edition wars at this point, and the new one on the horizon, so it seems. But then I went off to grad school. I got my MFA in type of game design, and started working with a company doing sort of applied gamification, right? It was client-based work, but a lot of it was tackling specific challenging problems and to try and find ways to create engaging simulations to address particular issues. And one of those was with the American Revolution Institute. So we were contracted to make a game. It's actually still available on their website for free. It's called Revolutionary Choices, if you Google that. But working on that, I was always big into history, but I got really into the particular era that Nations and Cannons is centered in, which is the long 18th century. I'm doing a lot of deep, specific research into trying to find dilemmas and different types of ways that we could talk about, not necessarily the wartime components of that conflict, but the civics, right? If you are in a period where there is very little resources to go around between the Continental Congress, the constituent states, and the Continental Army, what are some of the choices and challenges and difficult dilemmas that faced George Washington and the congressional leaders at that point in time? How did they make the most of the limited funds and material and supplies that they had available? And the aim of that project was to unpack the inevitability of the American Revolution, to really bring home that this was a kind of a desperate struggle for 7 long years, and that there's a lot of learning that we can do to kind of put kids in that first-person perspective and imagine that, from a position that we're not talking about the myth-making and the grand stories of history.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think it's always the difference between reading something out of a book as opposed to saying, okay, now really imagine yourself in that scenario and what that's like, and the certainly just the life skills that brings, not only historically of understanding that, but the life skills of putting yourself in somebody's shoes and how big of a difference that can make in a kid's life. I know that's something I struggle with my kids, just constantly like, okay, now imagine if you were them, how would you feel if that happened to you? And make sure that you're not, how your behavior reflects that. So that's really cool on multiple fronts.
Yeah, and that's something that I think TTRPGs do the best, is putting you in the shoes of somebody else, right? Giving you a perspective into, a different world, if it's a fantastical world, if it's a historical setting, right? And then letting you make your own decisions from there and letting your decisions play out.
Did you say you have an MFA in game design?
Yeah, I went to Parsons at the new school.
Great.
And it's a degree called Design and Technology. It's a bit of a grab bag, but I also teach game design at the university level, at the intermediate game design and level design is what I.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, go ahead, Doug.
Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a few standard questions that we ask anybody anytime they come into the booth with us. And this one, I'm really excited to hear your answer. And that's, what's awesome with gaming?
Huh, okay. It's a good question. As it applies to tabletop or in general?
In general.
It's an open-ended question.
Yeah. I mean, what I like about tabletop TTRPGs a lot is that there's just endless variety, right? You can have a rule book and you can sit down with a group of friends, and just totally depending on who's GMing, what system it is, what people are feeling, what if you got beer and pretzels around, or if it's more of a serious endeavor, right? You can go in a million different directions, and I think the improv aspect of that is evergreen. It's one of those things it's always going to be a good time. It's always going to be different, and I think that variety is really the spice of life. Some folks are saying that we're kind of in like a new Renaissance golden age of like indie TTRPGs, of which we at Flagbearer are definitely the beneficiaries of. But just walking around at Gen Con this year, there's so much new stuff, so much really unique things that are out there that you wouldn't have seen, and it's night and day compared to the first year that we went out to Gen Con, which was during COVID. And seeing that rebound and seeing all of the really cool projects that people have come to life and get out there in the world, and you can see people playing and excited about it, it's a fantastic feeling.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've just got one more, then I'll send it back to you, Douglas. But tell us about the Educator Outreach Program. So Nations and Cannons was a successful Kickstarter. Congratulations. 1,302 backers as of yesterday. $130,000 pledged. That's awesome. But tell us about this Educator Outreach Program that you have.
First, tell us about the game.
Yeah, there you go.
And then tell us about the Educator Outreach.
Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to, Nations and Cannons is a system that is based around the 18th century. Particularly, our main product, our core rules, is oriented in and around the American Revolution. But we are very interested in using it to explore history, to explore revolutionary history, particularly throughout that era, and to equip you as a game master with the tools you need to tell your own stories set in any of the revolutions that preceded or succeeded the American Revolution, or during that conflict, or to follow our campaigns. And that's the book that we just did a Kickstarter for. Is called The American Crisis. That has been a project that's been in the works for a couple of years now, and we are excited to be finally putting the finishing touches on it. We're hoping to get that out and ready for print in the next month or so. And that is a 7-chapter adventure story that goes from Bunker Hill through to Valley Forge. It's got annotated atlases, biographies of key characters, primary source quotes, right? And it's going to be a fully fledged source book that you can use to follow along, kind of a high stakes espionage storyline that takes you through all of the most important moments from 1775 to 1778, culminating with the famous winter at Valley Forge, which you might notice is not the end of the American Revolution, and it's definitely something that we're looking to follow up with the second book set in the South and the West of that country.
What kind of characters are people allowed, can you be in the game? So when I hear nations and cannons, it kind of makes me feel like it's a wartime game or a war game, but from what you're describing, it's very much people living at the time, not necessarily wars and battles. So what kind of characters and things can you be in this world?
So we're trying to kind of walk a line of the players are sort of heroic, larger-than-life figures, right? So good reference points are people like Molly Pitcher or Daniel Boone, right? That you are kind of by the time you're reaching max level, you've achieved a kind of a folkloric status. But you are the folks who are, you're not standing shoulder to shoulder in the middle of a pitched battle, but you are spies or scouts or saboteurs behind enemy lines, sort of achieving key objectives that you can, that kind of tip the scales of this war. And, particularly because it's a role-playing game, right, we really want to lean into all the different aspects that you can, if you're not, a traditional combatant, right? If you want to play as a chaplain or someone who goes undercover in disguise to gather intelligence out, right? There are lots of ways that we have the storyline that is set during wartime, but we wanted to really reach out and engage with other aspects of heroism that you could embody in that. It's probably important to note, so Nations and Cannons is an adaptation of the Dungeons & Dragons rule set, right? So we built it to sit right on top of D&D. And so
you're telling me I can bring my wizard right in? I can just port my wizard in?
Well,
or I got this ranger. You wouldn't believe what he could do. I just want to put my ranger, right up there, get him on the Potomac, and just go to work. You know what I mean? Sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm just thinking of my characters from D&D Adventures League and just porting them right into your world, Pat. I'm sure you haven't heard that before, huh?
Oh, no. We get that quite a lot. You're more than welcome to. This really comes down to what the GM is feeling flexible with. We
a barbarian.
Well,
of mythical descent.
I think everybody's a human, right? We've got alternative rules for choosing your role in the party rather than your sort of fantastical race or species, as it's called in the new version of D&D. And that's by design, right? If everyone is playing as a human, then we went in and found ways to make that more interesting, right? If you're a veteran or a pioneer or a scholar, right, these are going to give you additional traits and characteristics that can kind of lean in and let you roleplay in a different direction. But the character classes that we use actually are barbarian, fighter, ranger, rogue, and a new class we created called the Firebrand, which is your Alexander Hamilton rabble-rouser type, right? And it's built to be seamlessly balanced and to work against all of stock D&D, right? So we give you the rules to run in a historical setting and to play without any supernatural elements. But it's all balanced, the same way. The rules are all fully compatible. So if you wanted to go ahead and drop in some ghosts and goblins and play a adventure of, let's say, Benjamin Franklin Banshee Slayer, which it was one of our stretch goals for the Kickstarter to do a one shot of that. It started as a joke and is something that more and more people are responding to. So
Did you make it? Did you make the stretch goal?
We definitely did. We have a prototype of it that's been released, and we're going to be working on that. That's after we get the book out to print. We're going to be circling back and getting and completing that, and then maybe seeing where it goes. So if you wanted to run a game that was set during the American Revolution but had fantastical elements and sort of add that layer back in, you're more than welcome to. I can't tell you how to run your own game, right?
Spell of enchantment on the British.
Looks
Right.
like I know what we're doing for Thanksgiving in the McCabe household this year.
We've created, by removing supernatural elements from our baseline rules, we had to find additional places for complexity, right? Because you strip out spells, you lose a lot of really central mechanics, and we layered that back in by adding black powder mechanics for muskets, other types of small arms, grenades, which at this point were little more than an iron ball filled with gunpowder. Very, very dangerous when they misfire. And artillery, right? So I think we have, I think, probably the most sophisticated black powder system any of us ever designed for 5e. But
That's awesome.
when you talk about artillery, we have rules where you can only target creatures of a certain size with artillery, right? You can't be shooting like one particular guy in a line with a big 6-pound cannon. It doesn't work that way. They're not that accurate. But one of the running jokes that we've had with using spells and stuff, if you want to do that, is what happens if you cast in large person, right? Does the tactic for the wizard become to go and embiggen Cornwallis so that we can then shoot him?
Yeah, I would want to get to two-hand combat as quickly as possible in that situation. So now I think would be a great time to tell us about the educator outreach program and kind of how that works and how, I mean, you're on the Game Schooler podcast. We have librarians, homeschoolers, educators, and just gamers of all types and variety that are, part of this community here. So tell us a little bit about the educator outreach program.
So education is obviously very much in our DNA, right? It's something that we're very passionate about. If you go on our website, core rules, we have a starter kit, which is it's a 70-page PDF. It's everything in our core rules, but the GM-facing chapters and pre-gen characters that are available free of charge, right? And those will be in perpetuity as part of our educational mission. But more so than that, we really are trying to get this into schools, right? We think that there are lots of benefits, obviously, to using TTRPGs as an extracurricular, but there's lots of other additional educational merits from, social and emotional learning, creative writing, ways to work out like problem solving, and more school districts have been using TTRPGs, particularly in special needs classrooms, right? So what we're kind of hoping is, if you're already using D&D, why not do it with something that has some educational merit?
Yeah.
That we're teaching history along the way. Like I said, civics is something that's really important to us. We've created this game and this system, we have all these combat rules and everything, but it's about a period and a place, and we really try and lean into key topics in social studies. Not just the wartime aims, but I always say that, in our module about Valley Forge, right? We really go into what does it feel like when everyone around you, all your fellow soldiers that you are sort of embedded with, they're starving, nobody has any boots, smallpox is endemic to the camp, right? And we put you through that. We make you roll a winter quarters check several times over the course of that adventure. It's built to kind of be this grueling slog that brings home this idea that things are really kind of desperate. What are some ways that we might try and do some problem solving here? What are some ways that we might push some ethical boundaries, right? Like there definitely were soldiers in the Continental Army that turned to brigandage at that point in time just to feed themselves. and whole skirmishes that erupted over hogs to be slaughtered, right? Of the British and the Americans fighting over food at this wintertime. So that's sort of our bona fides of what we try and teach, with primary sources along the way that we use to quote and to kind of bring some flavor into the world. As far as our outreach program, we will send a copy of our core rules. We've got soft covers that we've printed that we can put out and put in the mail to any educator that requests it of us, right? So if you're a teacher, a homeschooler, librarian, go to our website, click on the educators link. That's nationsandcanons.com, and look us up, and we'll get it out to you, right? Because we really want this to be a resource that's available. And we're coming up on I think next year is the 250th anniversary of 1775, right? So I think more and more there are going to be opportunities to celebrate this period in American history and to lean into this stuff. So if you're part of an organization that is looking to celebrate that, or to do a deep dive, or to tell your own stories with local history, please reach out. We're always interested in ways to collaborate and connect, and to give you pointers on ways to bring your history to life.
It's so cool. The next question I'm going to ask may be huge and possibly impossible to answer, and a tall ask. I am not I don't know that I've ever played a role-playing game. So I am kind of on the outside of the spectrum. I've played adjacent to role-playing, or, certainly gotten into character while playing other board games and things like that. But if I am a teacher or somebody with no skill in role-playing games, but what I'm hearing during this episode sounds really cool and interesting to me, how do I get started? And that's where the tall ask is. I'm essentially asking you how do I get into role-playing, and more importantly, how do I get into your system of nations and canons?
I'll give you kind of a circuitous answer here, right? Because I've talked to some folks from Wizards of the Coast, who publishes Dungeons and Dragons, and their strategy is kind of interesting, right? Which is, they say, deputize the kids. That what you want to do is to reach out to, if you're doing extracurricular and after-school program, etc., right? There already are, by doing that, you're looking to serve a target audience of students who are already interested in this material. And there's probably one or two, or maybe a dozen of them.
Yeah.
Depending on your organization, your scale, what have you, that are already, if not already playing these games, already really interested in them, watching live streams, listening to let's play podcasts, stuff like that, right? Where there's probably someone that you can do that will either teach the ropes, right, or to start to have kids run game sessions for other kids, sort of to teach those budding game masters in your cohort, and then they can pass that skill set on and on. Tabletop role-playing games require a game master, generally speaking, all right? And the game master is, and this is going to be a little bit review, but a game master is a sort of a combination of referee and storyteller and an sort of rules interpreter, right? They facilitate the game, and their job is to kind of tell you the story and sort of have the world react as players describe their characters' actions and improvise what they're doing. And that is something where it's definitely a skill set that to be learned, but a teacher is kind of already halfway there in the way that they interpret material, in lesson plans, right? That there is a strong amount of performance and in being able to capture a room and to give guidance and these types of things. Definitely, I would say one of the reasons why we chose for Nations and Canons to work with the Dungeons and Dragons rule system is because it's the most popular. It's got sort of an enormous broad spectrum appeal. And something people ask me quite naturally is, why did you build a system that sits on top of D&D as opposed to building your own role-playing game rule set? And that is largely in service to our educational mission of we wanted something that there's probably a couple of geeky teachers in your area, right?
Yep.
Who've experimented with this, right? And if we said, you have to learn something entirely new, that's an off-ramp. But if it sits on top of this existing rule set that a lot of people know and love, and we've taken it and we've done some interesting and novel things with it, well, then it's something where you can really get adoption and get to a place where there is hopefully enough people in your area that you can start to play and start to learn.
Awesome.
Yeah. Did you have to get permission from Wizards of the Coast? You said that you talked to them, and I know how protective they can be about their 5e. Like, what was that like? You know what I mean?
I've mostly talked to them informally, right, at like trade shows and things, right? There is a whole ecosystem of people who publish third-party content.
Yes.
There were some controversies around this last year. I think it's more or less quieted down at this point. But yeah, we are not we're not claiming ownership over dragons and beholders, right? We're doing something it's entirely novel. So when I've spoken to folks from Wizards, they've generally been supportive, although pretty hands off, right? It's a big company and they've got a million things going on.
Awesome.
But they also have an educator program as well. I'm not sure how the role of the new rule set is factoring into all that, but that's something where I think if teachers are interested and go to their website, just to plug every option that's available. Right? If you're in education and you're not already aware, that's definitely something that you should also check out.
Great, thanks, Pat. Hey, why is history important?
Well, I think that we learn a lot of lessons from the past. I think that definitely history informs the present, and it can be difficult, especially when you're looking at things that happened centuries ago, get lessons that feel like they apply to the modern day, right? But if you do a little bit more digging, if you really unearth that human angle, then a lot of things come more clear, right? During the American Revolution, and this is obviously it's a complex topic, right? Because you had among those revolutionaries, among the ones who said that we're going to rebel and we want to form our own nation, you definitely had an overrepresentation of sort of the rich white planter class of the ones who served in the Continental Congress and kind of came to control the levers of power during the war and particularly after the war, right? Anytime there's a revolution, you kind of blow the barn door off its hinges as far as you're creating a new society and no one quite knows what's going to take shape, and then things kind of ossify and settle down. And you did have some people there who were pretty mercenary, right? I don't want to pay these taxes that Britain has imposed. I want to be able to conduct my business or my smuggling business in a way that I choose. You had some people that were war profiteers even that, used that conflict as a method to enrich themselves. You had others, though. Thomas Paine, I think, is probably the figure that I identify most with from this period in time, that really were ardently true believers in equality and the spirit of egalitarianism, right? Of how can we create a new society for the benefit of everyone? And, what is... We have this document that states that all men are created equal, and yet, the vast majority of the people that signed that document held human beings in bondage. And that, I think, is really interesting, that you had these figures with aspirations of creating a better world, and they created something, in this country that I think has stood the test of time, and is quite novel, that created a foundational document and set of principles that then numerous other revolutions, across the Atlantic, in places like Haiti and Latin America, and attempts in Ireland and Poland, that really tried to and learned a lot of lessons from the American experiment. But it was also deeply flawed in lots of ways. And if I allow you to envision the past, and envision the past from an active role, no matter who you are, what type of character you're playing, right? You can see, you can imagine potentially what might have been a different outcome, a better country that might have formed. This is the thing that I think makes the spirit of revolution something that lends itself really well to role playing. And when we look at the framers and some of the decisions that they made, we're again interrogating it from the human level and looking at there are these weird and arcane things like the gold standard versus the silver standard, right? Tariffs and all these weird political things that feel very stuffy and absolute when we read about them today. But if you take a step back and you examine how they would have impacted someone's livelihood, right? Why they were political fights about certain decisions in history centuries ago, you realize that the people that were on the front lines of conflicts or debate or discussion were just going about their lives in a very similar way and dealing with very similar struggles that we have. And I think there's never been a more important kids to really learn about civics, learn about those foundational elements, and really to take them to heart, because civics and a civic society is something that is definitely under siege a little bit today, right? And knowing more about that is definitely important for any well-educated citizen.
Yeah. Well, certainly the technology and the values and things have changed. However, the human condition remains the same. And being able to put yourself in this way, and like you said, just instead of reading a book, being in the book and imagining, well, what kind of decision would you make? And maybe the decision that seems obvious 250 years later maybe wasn't so obvious at the time. And I think it's a great way to experience history as opposed to just learn it, right? And so, kudos to you guys for doing such an awesome job of putting something together that kind of serves both masters, which is really cool.
That's something that, when I do work for museums, the counterfactual is something that's always, I think, the most important educational element, where I can give you an outcome and I can say, this is what happened historically, and this is the sort of decision chain that led to it, and here are the pivot points. But here's an alternate outcome, right? What would have happened if Harry Truman had decided not to drop the atomic bomb, right? There's alternate history. There's a million different ways that you can spell out the different world that might have come out of that. But I think imagining the counterfactuals, well-informed counterfactuals that allow you to, by process of research, go in and think, all right, well, what else could have happened? Like, what are some different avenues that the world could have gone down? And I think exposing that and putting that kind of in someone's mind to kind of grapple with brings more context and perspective to the route that history actually did. Museums and historic sites they vary a lot, right? Some of them are very conservative and they always want to hew to establish history. But I think the most effective educational interventions, as far as interactive systems, are ones that allow you to imagine an outcome. As long as it's always contextualized and you say this is what provide enough evidence that the player can make up their own mind. But being able to go in and place yourself in that decision point, I think is a really invaluable tool, again, for getting into the heads of someone in the past.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is. I'm curious here. How has your education impacted your enthusiasm for the hobby? Right, I'm interested somewhat in that cross section of, engagement, enthusiasm, and the hobby in general. And you clearly have a background of education, history, design. So I'm just wondering how all of those pieces kind of fit together for you, Pat.
I mean, it's a little bit of when you know how the sausage gets made, the sausage is a little less interesting, right? I live and breathe this stuff. I think that there definitely is a certain level of fatigue when you've been making games all your life, and you go out and you play something, and it's, I've seen this before, but I try and stay optimistic, right? I would say I'll give a personal anecdote here, right? That one of the reasons why I find games to be so valuable and so important socially is that a game is a closed system where everyone knows what the kind of expectations and responsibilities are, right? There's a phenomenon in game studies called the magic circle. Exactly, right? Yeah, he was a Dutch anthropologist writing at the turn of the century, and this is your typical corporate icebreaker event. Everyone goes around and we're doing silly songs and games and finding ways that everyone isn't focused on themselves or how awkward they feel or the uncomfortableness of the situation, but you put it in a context of here's something that we're all doing together and we know what the expectation is and we know what the social rules are and we're playing and we can get kind of more into it. It's a really great social bonding tool. And for myself, so I'm autistic, and I've always found that games drawn to them for that specific reason, that they're a great way that I can get to know someone, I can kind of let my hair down, sort of mask, if you will, right, and be able to be at home because I don't have some of the social pressures that might otherwise make navigating that space difficult. And I think games as systems that are rule-bound, that have very set input and output, are tools that are very, very valuable for neurodivergent people processing the world and for teaching neurodivergent students, right? And there definitely are some programs out there that are particularly oriented around using role-playing games to help acclimate and teach socialization skills, in a safe learning environment.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So what's next for Flagbearer Games and the current Kickstarter? How long is that running for?
So that Kickstarter, we did that a year and a half ago, and so it's the raise is in and done. We have the book that we are trying to finish up and bring to market now. We've blown by our deadline a little bit. We were originally hoping to get it out by this point. But
you're good. It's on the water. It's on the water. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Just another update next month. We get it.
It's normal.
But I think what we've done over the course of this process, we've learned a lot. We walked in here thinking, oh boy, we can create this source book, and from all the background material that we've had, and there's been so much research. Think about the amount of research that you might have allocated for a project like this and triple it, because you
can't just make stuff up.
Well, you can't just make stuff up, but then you have to create adventure scenarios, right?
Yeah.
You have to create stories that are compelling and dramatic, but they have to adhere to history. They have to have a balance there, right? Where you're trying to create something that's fun and novel and engaging and creates stakes that feel real and earned for the players. They want to be, having their successes, but you don't have to want to create things that create wild divergences from history, right? Or if you are creating a divergence, it's something that you can set up where it doesn't totally throw the dominoes of history down the line, kind of like I was saying earlier. Anyway, we have the source book, The American Crisis. I think we're almost done with it. Again, I want to say maybe within a month and a half, 2 month time frame. The hope is to get that at the very least up as a PDF, and then to start doing physical fulfillment on it. And then beyond that, we are really interested in this period in history. Again, The American Crisis. This book is the first half of our story, so we want to follow up with the second book, but also to explore other conflicts, other periods in time that had people really rebelling against the status quo. There's lots of elements from American history, like the War of 1812, the Lewis and Clark expedition, but also people always ask us about stuff set during the Golden Age of piracy or the Napoleonic Wars, right? Brits always want to do a Sharps Rifles campaign, right? And so I think there's lots of cool directions that we could take this, and we're very interested in exploring other historical periods and in equipping game masters with the tools that they need to tell other their own stories set throughout the world in this time frame.
It's awesome. As the 1,300 backers get their physical copies and start to homebrew and get their own, that as that culture grows, I really hope you and your team, can stay engaged and motivated and get some of those other products out there. I think that's got to be such a challenge to mitigate against burnout and some of those things, and all, just managing the project as well. So really wish you all at Flagbearer the best of luck with that. I do have one burning follow-up question, if that's okay, Pat, because you talked about how the sausage is made and things like that. But tell us what's one awesome game in the hobby, or what's one thing that you've played lately where you're like, oh man, this is incredible. It doesn't have to be new, doesn't have to be the hotness. We tell stories all the time about games that are 15 and 20 years old in our Game of the Week segment, but just curious what you've stumbled across lately where you're like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
I have been digging back into, so like I said, I'm sort of well immersed in multiple different editions of Dungeons & Dragons, right? I've been playing Neverwinter Nights again. They did a remastered version. This is a game that came out almost 20 years ago now, which it's a version of third edition D&D.
Edition Monty Cook, yeah.
Yeah, where you can make your own character. There are so many really creative homebrew campaigns that people would make. People would make their own modules and upload them, and that scene is really it took off with the release of the remaster. There's some really neat ones out there that really push that system to its limits. And I guess I was a little too young. I never quite dove into it before, but I'm having a lot of fun just messing around with it and seeing what things people have created. Apparently, somebody working in conjunction with Colonial Williamsburg actually built an American Revolution module for Neverwinter Nights, which is the reason why I downloaded it again in the first place. Again, almost 20 years ago. And I've been trying to find, the people who made that. I think it was some university project, right? But it just goes to show that there are linkages between this type of stuff, and people exploring the weird stories and role-playing aspects that you can do with it that have been going on for forever. So I think that's super cool. I think it's still available to download. Definitely it's on my list to check out.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Pat, for sharing your story and for what you folks at Flagbearer Games are doing. We're really excited about that project and just the neat avenue of combining history and gaming and all that you do. We wish you the best of luck and thanks for coming on and spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, Pat. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about our high five, well-designed game boards, which you may say, this is strange and bizarre. What do you mean by that? And I mean everything by that, whether it's the art, the usability. There's several different avenues that I've kind of gone down for this list. Michael apparently has a ginormous list, and he's going to wing it as he goes based on what I say. Is that where you're at right now?
No, I have 10. Wing it is a little to the right of me. I have boxes strewn all over the room. So yes, we'll get it started. Number 5 for me.
One more thing before you start.
Oh yeah, no, it is wonderful.
It is a list that I wish I had almost like a log while I'm playing games of just like, oh yes, this one is good. Almost like a tick box, because it's hard to kind of, I know I've played a whole bunch of games that I'm like, this does a really good job. And I have no idea if those are the games that are on my list. And I feel like I wish that was something that I kept a little bit better track of. It's almost like when you read a good rule book.
Yeah.
You're like, this is a good rule book, but I don't remember or keep track of what rule book that was. So hopefully we're doing okay here. So
yeah, no, we're good. And I am putting 2 games in my number 5 spot, and there's nothing you can do to stop that.
Hey, I've got 3 in my number 5.
Perfect. Number 5, I have Boop from Smirk and Dagger and Scott Brady. What's fantastic about Boop is that the game box is the game. And so, you've got these little cats that you're booping off of, but it just all fits together. I mean, the box, it's just amazing. And also Turtle Splash, a game that does very similar thing, whereas Boop is for more of that family, partner, spouse, or just playing with one of your kiddos. Turtle Splash does that in a kid's game, where with flicking, you're flicking a dice right down into the
water
pond.
hole?
Yeah, into the water hole. Thank you. So many great games. I lost the words. But those 2 both fit into the 5 spot in a way that when I take the cover off, it has a wow factor for kids. It really does engage kids. You don't have to be a cat lover, although my children are, and I'm allergic. Apologies, kids, and they let me know about it all the time every time they see a cat anywhere. But what Scott Brady and team did at Smirk and Dagger, and what our friends over at Lucky Duck did, and I need to get the designer for Turtle Splash. It is Joel and Rafael Escalante did with Turtle Splash. Just excellent little where the box is the game board. And so that's my number 5 spot, are those 2 games.
Great choice. Yeah, I didn't even think of that as a possibility. That is dad joke intended, out of the box, Michael.
Well done, Doug.
My number 5 is representative of a specific artist, and you could use this for everything else on my list. Usually has some sort of function or gameplay enhancement, and I did want to acknowledge we didn't do just like artwork on game boards, but if you were going to pick one, it would be Michael Menzel. And the game that I've got in there is Santiago de Cuba. You could also throw in Stone Age, which we talked about in episode 122, or Cape May, which we talked about in episode 117. His game boards have just small details in them where you can see people walking around on the street, and they're little universes that I think do such a great job of bringing you into the game and into the world. And although the art style is similar across those things, I get the feeling of when I'm playing Santiago de Cuba, I feel like I'm in Cuba because of how cool the game board looks. Cape May feels like you're on the East Coast of the United States, and Stone Age feels like you're in a long time ago. But he does such a good job of just making a world. So Santiago de Cuba, 2011, the designer is Michael Reineck, and Eagle Griffin Games is a publisher of that in the United States, but kind of a representative pick for Michael Menzel and the beautiful art that he puts on game boards. I think you're muted, Michael.
Oh, man, I can't stand when people do that. I did it on our own show. I fire myself. I was just saying that's awesome, Doug. I muted myself because I was putting the lids back on the boxes because this mess is driving me nuts over here, and I didn't want to have the while you were talking about Michael Menzel's awesome art. Number 4 for me was a game of the week all the way back in episode 106, and that is Flamecraft, designed by Manny Vega, art by Sandra Tang, developed by Peter Vaughn, and published by Cardboard Alchemy. Published all the way back in 2022. When I played Flamecraft and they had the neoprene playmat as the game board, it was one of those, I didn't know they could do that moments. And there was one other game that is not on here that I had similar around the same time, but what I love about the game board, the neoprene playmat and Flamecraft that actually does fit back in the box very nicely, is that I can teach that game just by getting the game mat out. Once I set up the game board of Flamecraft and get the starter shops back in, all of the rules start coming back to me. Yeah, and I have that for one other game on my list, but I absolutely love that about Flamecraft. A few months ago, I was getting some pictures for our Twitter, our X account, and our Discord, and so I set it up and was just snapping away on my phone there. Man, this is beautiful. And so I love that the game board itself actually rolls up into a box. And I know a lot of other games do that now, but for me, that was one of the big time innovative ones. The first time I played it was at your house and saw it, and it just had some wow factor for me. Beautiful little board there. So number 4, Flamecraft.
I like your list so far, Michael. You're knocking it out of the park. We'll see what your number 1 is. I'll throw it under the bus. But that
you will. You're building me up just like a sports reporter, man. You're building me up to tear me down.
But yeah, no, Flamecraft was on my short list as well. My number 4 is kind of, in some ways, a lot of these are representative picks, but this one is one that has multiple boards in the box and how much that changes the game up. And this one we talked about in episode 154, and that's the Art Project. Published in 2023 by designers Florian Cyrier and Benoit Turpin from the Op Games. And the fact that there are
trade art.
Yeah, and that there are 6 different, 3 different front and back game boards in this game, and the variety that brings to the game is such a cool thing. Usually when it's, and I don't know that it's the first one that I saw do that, but the first one that I was so impressed by when we originally got the demo for that game. And usually when they, game companies or designers throw in something, it's like, oh, we've got 4 factions. You can pick a faction, but rarely is it. And I'm used to Ticket to Ride where they sell individual maps for other games. A lot of other games do that where there's extra boards you can buy. And this one, when they told me that there's 3 boards in the box, and I'm like, what? And they're double-sided, so
awesome.
They're both different. It's just a really cool concept that they were able to do that and keep it affordable. And kudos to them. The Art Project, just awesome with the 6 boards in that game.
Great poll, Doug. And they're thematic, right? And when you're in the United States, and if you're an art robber, every time you go through Texas, you got to drop off a gun, right? So they all have
one up,
or you pick one up, whichever one it is. Yep, no, that's a really good one. Yeah, number 3 for me was a game of the week, all the way back in episode 101, and that is Everdell from 2018, and that's designed by James A. Wilson, art by Andrew Bosley, publisher is Starling Games. And what I love about the game board in Everdell, no, it's not the gregarious tree. What I love about the game board in Everdell is how the expansions plug into it. And so I'm still blown away by how they just got this basic little board, but then the expansions all, we're going to add a pond over here, and we're going to add on the south end of the board. You didn't know that we could do that, did you? So how Spirecrest and all the other expansions add into that base board, I just really enjoy it. And so I was trying not to just get all picks from the last 5 or 6 years, but that was one where it's like, I can't take this any lower. This is as low as it can go on my list. Number 3, a game that we've talked about a lot. It's certainly still probably in my top 5 if I had to do a top 5. I love that game, and that is Everdell.
Great pull there. My number 3 we talked about in episode 72. It was not a game of the week, but it was in the School of Gaming, and that is a game called Campaign Trail. And it's got 2 things going for it. One of them, first of all, it's published in 2019. The designers are David Nathan and Jeff Cornelius, published by Gray Fox Games. And it's got 2 things, actually 3 things that I think are why I put it on the list. The first one is that the board includes the icons across the top of what are on the cards. And if you play the game, the cards have, they're multi-use cards, but not every icon or action is represented on every card. So there's a little bit of a cheat sheet across the top of the board. Great. I love that in the board. The other thing is the initial setup, you're putting a whole bunch of cubes on the board, are already printed on the board of what the starting scenario is. So you can just get the game set up right out of the gate. You don't need to look in the instructions and say, all right, the first player gets this, the second player gets that. Nope, you put the cubes all out in the starting position. Everything's ready to go. And the kicker on this one is board adjacent, because it is the board that you use for the scoring track, which this is a game about running for president and the electoral college and winning states and the votes according to that.
And it's apolitical, by the way.
Yes. So great game for this time of year, and does a really good job of that. But what they do is that each state has a cardboard token that fits in a sliding track that you can move to whoever is controlling that. And they are all designed in a way that the length of that token is equal to the number of electoral votes that they provide. And so you get this great visual indicator without having to add up any of the things. You don't have to say, oh, well, this state is 4, so, okay, 4, but now you're getting it, so take away 4. You just move these tokens back and forth between the board and look, and it's like, my track is longer, I am currently winning. And it's such a great mechanism. There are not a lot of games that do that. I can't really think of any other ones that do something similar. And the fact that it's so well based in reality on how the United States election system works just does a phenomenal job. So that's my number 3, Campaign Trail.
Fantastic, Doug. That's really good. Folks, when do you hear this level of disagreement for Doug and I? And
the non-existent disagreement?
The agreement, I meant to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, words are failing me. Apologies. I'll lock in here. 5 weeks after we did Campaign Trail in the School of Gaming, we did a different game called Smartphone Inc. in the School of Gaming. That was back in episode 77. And that's my number 2 game board, designed by Ivan Lashin, published here by Arcane Wonders in North America. And what I love about the board of Smartphone Inc. is, 1, the layout. I can see everything. 2, it has that dual layer. So when I build a building, it just clicks right into the board. Are you kidding me? It is a joy to put a company and build a company in Smartphone Inc. into that board. Another game that does play solo, but I don't want to play it solo because I want to play it with other people. And I think a reason for that is because of the actual board layout. It takes the world, puts it on a little flat space, and I have to figure out where I'm going to move. But I can't be too enthusiastic because otherwise someone might see where I want to go and move into that part of the world before I do. So I have to be somewhat stealthily of, oh, I'm just going there as I'm trying to build routes for my cell phone company. And to me, there's also something very 2018, 2019 about that game. It just, not only am I building a cell phone company, but I'm building it in that time period. So that's my number 2, Smartphone Inc.
Yeah, it's one that I feel like I've missed on my list. And you didn't even mention the thing that I love the most about that board.
I left it for you, Doug.
Oh, go ahead. Which is the kind of round tracker that is on the top of the board that just keeps the game moving perfectly. It's like, well, now we're in this phase, and it just does that so well. Which leads into my number 2, which is another game that has that level of this one. I don't necessarily think it's the prettiest board to look at, but it is so functional. And that is the game board for Castle Panic, which we talked about in episode 25. And it does 3 things that I think work really well. Is that the whole game is divided up into 6 groups of around the castle. And so you're rolling dice and placing monsters into those different groups. And it's so easy to see where they go. I rolled a 3. It's going to be coming in and attacking the castle from this area, this cone. So it does that really well. The second thing is on one corner of the board, it has the basic starting setup and the way that some of the special monsters function is printed right on the board. So like, oh, it's a troll. What does a troll do? And you can just look on the board and it says, this is how the troll functions. Awesome. And then the third part, which I just talked about on Smartphone Inc., but it is on the exact turn structure. It'll say, you draw a card, you do this, you can do that, end of turn, move to the next player. And so any game that has that, the rules on the board, I think just make it so functional. And this is a game that I can pretty much put the board out on the table and it's all back to me and I know how to go and I can teach right from there. I don't need to even pull out the rule book. And that's just a great feature of a game. So that's my number 2, Castle Panic.
Everything that Doug just said for his number 2, I want to run back and put that into my number 1. My number 1 favorite game board. See, I could only pick one that had the map of the United States of America. And for me, I went with Carnegie from 2022. And I just want to bloviate about this game for a few minutes. I'm going to say 2 words. Ian O'Toole. All right. As an artist, he's also a gamer. And when you look at the game board of Carnegie, folks, it's sitting on my lap, okay? The box itself probably weighs anywhere from 9 to 12 pounds just by weighing it out here. It's truly like the box is in my lap. And I thought about, okay, I need to do a reveal of the board, but knowing how notoriously clumsy I am, I would probably rip the board in half. So it's just going to safely...
YouTube. Yes, actually, can you do that? Because it'd make a great clip.
Yeah, hey, our subscribers will triple. But what I absolutely love about the board, and Doug just mentioned in his number 2 of Castle Panic, this is a hobby level game. It's one that I think it was around Christmas of 2022 when I'm like, I'm going to grind through it and learn it solo. And then at a game convention last year, I came back to it. And when it's on the table, I'm able to teach the game just by walking around the board. And you're trying to build routes. You're trying to send your workers out. You got to bring your workers back. And then the complicating factor, you need to make donations because it's on the life of Andrew Carnegie, right? And all of that is there just by looking at the board. And when I taught the game at a convention, I forgot about the donation piece. And somebody's like, well, what's this up here? Yeah, I had it in my notes, but I skipped over it because of a different question that was asked. Let me tell you about donations. And so what I really appreciate about this game is that the iconography on the game board is just fantastic. Now, the actual player board that you have in front too has these little dials that you pull out as you are advancing, and it's so satisfying. So that's awesome as well. But we're not talking about, player pieces. We're talking about the game board. So for me, it's my favorite is Carnegie.
All right. Well, I chose to put a map of the entire world in my number one spot, and that is Pandemic. I debated on whether I should put these two kind of together towards the top, which was Castle Panic and Pandemic, but Pandemic came out in 2008, published by designed by Matt Leacock and publisher Z-Man Games. But what Pandemic does, it does the next level of what Castle Panic does, which is not only does it have the order of play written on the board, not only is it easy to see how things are connected and it is laid out very well for an easy playing experience, but it also has dials that are keeping track of which diseases you've cured, how many outbreaks you've had, and what the current infection rate is. So how many cards you're drawing off the top of the card. And I think it just does a really good job. It's another one of those where I can put it on the table and I can say, if this dial gets here, we're going to lose. If this dial gets here, it's going to be very difficult. We haven't cured these things because the vials are still down at the bottom of the board. There's enough area around the locations to put all of the cubes. You don't feel like, they're on top of each other.
Yeah.
And there's the quick rule of play. I think I could be mistaken, but even on the, if you haven't cured it by the time you've gone through all of the player cards, you lose. And I think there might be a thing under that card stack that says something to that effect as well. And the decks of cards that you're using in the game have spots on the board. It's very clear where they go and everything gets set up. So just as and it would probably get the points over Castle Panic because the artwork is better. It's cleaner. The graphic design is better. So it's a Castle Panic +1. And that's my number one, Pandemic.
That's awesome. So how many games of the week did you have? Because Pandemic was episode 5. I know we've done Castle Panic.
Yep. And then if you count Stone Age and Cape May as part of my number 5, those are on there. So all 5 of mine we've talked about in detail on episodes.
That's awesome.
My 2 honorable mentions, ones that I thought about putting on the list, are also games of the week. I didn't put down the numbers, but Ticket to Ride, I think, does a good job of having the basic train scoring on there. And the kind of the wild card one, which maybe I wish I would have put on there, and that's Micro Macro Crime City.
Ooh.
Which just for a play experience of the artwork and the way that it is so unique to that game, which is just a giant Where's Waldo kind of map in black and white as you're hunting around for stories, is a really cool design. How about ones that were close to making your list,
Yeah,
Michael?
I want to jump in on one of your honorable mentions because did you know that they have all 4 micros that you can fit together into one giant map and play?
Crazy.
Oh, I want to try that.
It's like a giant floor puzzle.
Honorable mentions, I won't bring them all to the screen, but I do have Clank. It was a game of the week. There's just something about that above the map, below the map that works really well for me. And I just, like we've talked about, really easy to get back to the table to teach again. Also, Dog Park. Something about that board that just makes it pop. Was an honorable mention. And then I had Potion Explosion and then Lord of the Rings Anniversary Edition with the multiple boards and the John Howe art. But I thought if I put that out there, I'll get absolutely slammed by Doug. First cooperative ever designed by the good Dr. Reiner Knizia.
All right. So that is our high five. Let us know what game boards you love in your collection. Reminder to subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Again, Michael's doing some amazing stuff there, and it's a good follow. So check that out. I want to thank Pat from Flagbearer Games for spending some time chatting with us, and just an awesome interview, and look forward to learning more about that game. Join our Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. It's a unicorn in the board game industry and our tabletop hobby, I think. So go there if you want to have a different experience than maybe you're used to in the hobby. And next week, we've got a very special episode. I'm not going to spoil anything, but If everything goes to plan, we will have a very special episode next week that we are very excited to share with you. But with that being said, thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.